execution traces its roots back to the Latin word executio, which means to carry out or accomplish, originally referring to the act of enforcing a sentence or decree, but as societies evolved and systems of justice became more complex, the term execution began to take on a far grimmer meaning, specifically the putting to death of a condemned individual as a form of punishment. This grim practice was not born in medieval times, but inherited and transformed from earlier civilizations, including the Romans, whose legal codes and penalties heavily influenced medieval Europe in the dark and turbulent era known as the Middle Ages. Execution methods began as relatively straightforward affairs, often reserved for the most serious crimes such as treason, murder, or heresy. However, as the medieval period progressed, these methods evolved into increasingly elaborate and brutal spectacles designed not merely to end a life but to instill terror and obedience among the populace. The transformation from simple beheadings or hangings into more horrific and prolonged forms of punishment was driven by a combination of factors, including the desire of rulers to assert their authority, the need to deter crime in harsh times, and the influence of barbarian customs which favored public displays of power and suffering. In many parts of medieval Europe, the administration of justice was intertwined with the theatre of execution, where the condemned were not only punished but made into living warnings to anyone who might consider defying the law. This was a time when justice was as much about spectacle as it was about retribution, and where the cruelty of the execution method often symbolized the severity of the crime committed. The origins of some of these cruel practices can be traced directly to the barbarian tribes that roamed Europe before the establishment of strong centralized kingdoms. Their customs often emphasized harsh corporal punishment and public humiliation as means of social control. When these tribes settled and integrated with Roman populations, their traditions merged, giving rise to new forms of punishment that combined the legal sophistication of Roman law with the brutal efficiency of barbarian justice. This fusion created a cultural environment where execution was not merely a legal formality but a deliberate act of terror designed to demonstrate the absolute power of the ruling elite and the dire consequences of transgression. The early medieval execution methods were often swift and designed to spare unnecessary suffering, but with the gradual growth of monarchies and the church's influence, the nature of punishment shifted towards more calculated cruelty. Public executions became rituals of control. The condemned were subjected to processes that could last hours, even days, and the method chosen was often symbolic. The more heinous the crime, the more excruciating the punishment. Thus, simple death was no longer sufficient punishment. Instead, it had to be drawn out to maximize humiliation and pain. For example, those convicted of treason were frequently given the most brutal sentences as a warning to others, while lesser crimes might warrant hanging or banishment. Over time, the use of execution as a deterrent became a central pillar of medieval justice systems. Rulers understood that the fear generated by gruesome public punishments was a powerful tool in maintaining social order in an era without the widespread literacy or communication networks of today. The visual and visceral impact of a public execution was unparalleled. It spoke directly to the masses, forging a collective memory of authority and consequence. The medieval execution methods were often influenced by the need to balance severity with spectacle. The executioner was both an agent of the law and a performer whose role was to carry out the sentence in a manner that reinforced the power of the crown or local lord. The tools and techniques employed varied widely across regions, reflecting local customs, legal traditions, and the status of the condemned. Nobles might receive a swift beheading, while commoners faced hanging, drawing and quartering, or burning at the stake. This hierarchical approach to punishment underscored the rigid social stratification of medieval society and the belief that justice was not blind but deeply intertwined with class and privilege. The development of these brutal execution methods was also shaped by the religious context of the time. The medieval church wielded immense influence over the legal system and often dictated the moral framework within which justice was administered. Crimes against the faith, such as heresy or witchcraft, were met with particularly savage punishments, reflecting the church's determination to root out what it saw as existential threats to its authority. The fusion of secular and ecclesiastical power meant that execution methods could serve dual purposes, punishing not only the body but the soul through public humiliation and symbolic acts intended to mark the condemned as eternally damned. This religious dimension added another layer of cruelty to the already harsh realities of medieval execution methods. The evolution of execution methods from simple to complex brutal rituals can be seen as a reflection of the medieval worldview, where suffering was both a physical punishment and a spiritual trial. The condemned were often portrayed as sinners whose suffering served as penance and a warning to others. This intertwining of justice, punishment, and religious morality created a system where execution was elevated to a grim art form designed to inspire both fear and submission among the living. The legacy of the origins and development of medieval execution methods is a testament to the dark ingenuity of human cruelty, where law and spectacle merged to create some of the most terrifying punishments ever recorded in history. The gradual shift from swift justice to prolonged torment reveals not only the Medieval obsession with control and order, but also a society deeply marked by violence, fear, and the relentless assertion of power over life and death. In this grim context, the condemned stood as harsh reminders of the cost of defiance and the brutal realities of medieval governance, a world where execution was less about justice and more about domination and terror. Among the many horrific execution methods used in medieval Europe, one stands out for its sheer cruelty and the suffering it inflicted, but it was by no means alone. The landscape of medieval execution was dominated by a variety of brutal techniques, each with its own horrifying characteristics, and each serving the dual purpose of punishment and public spectacle. Hanging was one of the most common methods employed across Europe. It was relatively simple. The condemned was suspended by the neck until death occurred, usually through strangulation, but even this seemingly straightforward method could be made more gruesome by the addition of the long drop, which broke the neck instantly, or the short drop, which prolonged suffering by slow asphyxiation. Beheading was seen as a more honorable death, often reserved for nobility or those of higher social status. It was swift when properly carried out, but botched executions were not uncommon, leading to agonizing moments where the executioner had to strike multiple times. The sword or axe used was wielded with the intent to sever the head in a single blow, but the reality was often far less merciful. Burning at the stake was reserved for crimes such as heresy, witchcraft, and treason. It was a particularly cruel execution method designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. Victims were tied to a wooden stake surrounded by kindling, and then set ablaze. The flames consumed the flesh slowly. The pain was excruciating, and death could take an agonizingly long time. Sometimes victims were strangled or shot with arrows before the fire reached them to spare them the worst suffering, but this was not always the case. Drawing and quartering was perhaps one of the most graphic and terrifying execution methods of medieval times. It was a punishment specifically designed for those convicted of high treason. In England, the condemned was typically hanged almost to death, then disemboweled, their entrails burned before their eyes, and finally their body was divided into 4 parts, often displayed publicly as a dire warning to others. The process was deliberately prolonged to maximize the torment and public display of the sovereign's power. The severity of the punishment often depended on the nature of the crime and the social standing of the condemned. Nobles might receive a quick beheading, while commoners faced the grisly spectacle of being hanged, drawn and quartered, or burned alive. This stratification underscored the rigid social hierarchies of medieval society and the belief that the punishment must fit not only the crime but also the status of the individual executing justice. In this way, reinforced social order as much as it served legal function. Other less common but equally cruel methods included the infamous Iron Maiden, a coffin-like device studded with spikes designed to impale the victim slowly and painfully. Though its historical accuracy is debated, it symbolizes the medieval penchant for elaborate instruments of torture. The use of the rack was another method often employed before execution to extract confessions or punish the condemned by stretching their bodies to the point of dislocation and intense pain. These torturous practices were often preludes to the final execution method and part of the overall spectacle. The public nature of executions was vital to their function. Fear was a powerful tool in medieval governance, and rulers ensured that punishments were witnessed by as many people as possible. The square marketplace or the castle courtyard would become a stage for death, where the condemned suffering was on full display. The crowd's reaction ranged from horror to morbid fascination, and executions often became events that drew thousands, reinforcing the message that disobedience would be met with merciless consequences. The spectacle was not just about inflicting pain but about humiliation. The condemned were stripped of dignity, their bodies exposed to the elements, and their final moments made as degrading as possible. This public degradation was designed to break the spirit of both the victim and the witnesses, ensuring that the social order remained unchallenged. The medieval execution methods were not only about physical punishment, but psychological torment. The anticipation and fear leading up to execution were part of the cruelty. The condemned were often held in prisons or dungeons for extended periods, sometimes subjected to torture to weaken their resolve and extract information. This prolonged suffering before death heightened the terror and solidified the control of authorities over life and death. The diversity of execution methods across Europe reflected regional customs, legal traditions, and the influence of local rulers. Some regions preferred burning, others hanging or beheading, and in some cases methods were combined, such as hanging followed by disembowelment, to compound the horror. These variations highlight how execution was tailored not only to the crime but also to the cultural context and the message the authorities wished to send. The use of fire in executions was particularly symbolic. It was seen as a way to purify the condemned soul as well as to physically destroy the body. This belief gave burning at the stake a dual function, both punitive and religious, reflecting the medieval fusion of justice and faith. Similarly, the gruesome practice of drawing and quartering was not only a means to kill but a ritual of dismantling the traitor's body, symbolizing the destruction of their betrayal in corporeal form. The cruelty of these execution methods extended beyond the condemned to their families and communities. The public nature of the punishment served as a warning to entire populations. The display of severed heads or dismembered bodies in public spaces was a stark reminder of the consequences of crime and rebellion. This macabre practice was intended to sow fear and discourage any thoughts of dissent or defiance against the ruling powers in many cases. Execution methods were designed to linger in the memory long after the event itself. The horror of the spectacle was transmitted through oral tradition stories and later written accounts, ensuring that the terror of execution was embedded in the collective consciousness